Hi, Lois.
Good morning. It's David. I'm
Hello, hi,
sorry.
David. Rabbi, going to be late this morning.
Did they tell you that?
Well, I don't know, just that he's not here.
I
But
know.
anyway,
Did
I'm
you?
sure he'll come on in a couple of minutes.
Lois is checking the email to make sure.
No, nothing from him.
No, there was nothing from him. He'll probably come on in.
Right. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? As good as
Pretty
can be
good.
under the circumstances of everything
I
going.
know. I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah,
It's hard to say happy Hanukkah. You know what I mean?
it's hard. It is
Yeah.
hard. Anyway, we should do our best. Hello,
Yeah.
Rabbi.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
Hi, Rabbi.
Good morning.
Hi. That's good. I'm glad you guys had a chance to schmooze. That's good.
Rabbi,
Yeah, David?
I know this is, this is the old thing, but what do we decide about the Abravanel? That was his basic philosophy that he thought power to the people, or that he thought it's like on the model of the Sanhedrin, or even Plato's Republic. Things would be guided by the wisest, and it's a few men. So is it the many or the few that's supposed to have the final say?
It sounded like from him, it was the many, but he said that there might be smaller councils towards the top that are making the decisions. Like he was suggesting that model from Shmos, where there would be officers of the thousands, officers of the hundreds, officers of the 10. So usually the way it's understood is that the officer over the 10 is on the lowest rung of leadership. But he was saying the other way around, that you have like the officers of 1,000, those would be like a council of 1,000 people, and the 100 would be a council of 100, and so the 10 would be a council of 10. I don't know. I mean, we didn't read everything, and so it could be that there's somebody who's technically running things, but he wouldn't be imbued with the power of the monarch. But also, one of the things we were wondering before was what was he modeling it after? And apparently Venice, the Venetian form of government, was what he was modeling it on. But Venice itself seemed like was modeling itself after the Greeks and the Romans. But I think what he felt, I don't know. I mean, he even said like the Romans, when they moved to having a Caesar, that was the beginning of the end for them. That was where the real corruption happened. So it sounded like the problem was not whether there was one person like a prime minister. It seemed like the problem was if there was one person like a king. So he seemed to have very strong feelings about a person imbued with the power of the monarchy, and especially in a situation where he's not subject to the law, or he somehow can overcome the law.
Oh.
So yeah, it seemed like something more like republics or parliaments or what we call democracies. He felt were.
Oh,
He had this very ideal view of them. He didn't feel they were going to be subject, because he felt there was checks and balances. The checks and balances were the elections, which, I mean, looking back, it seems naive to think that there weren't, that corruption wouldn't enter, and that the ballot box would not be enough of a disincentive, to corruption. But that did seem to be his opinion.
Well, Plato at least believed that if you were a good person, if by meditating on things, you'd be able to do them, and doesn't work out that way.
Right. There's I once read what happened there. Somehow I got out of Samaria there. Right. I read a book by the Dalai Lama, and he was talking about that there was a kind of hierarchy of experience. The first level is reading about something and thinking about an idea. So let's say you read about the idea and then you contemplate the idea. There is some effect, but it's a limited effect. And then he had a higher level, which was things that you experience in meditation. You experience them more as epiphanies, as realizations, and so he suggested that they have a longer and deeper impact than just ideas that you're thinking about. But I think we would say that ideas that you live and that you can follow through with action and practice, that way of absorbing the idea is higher than those than just thinking about it, or maybe an epiphany that you got through some kind of meditation. But there are a lot of Sfarim that assume that if they tell you an idea, maybe they present it in a clever way, that because you now know that, your behavior is going to change. And it seems like Musar Sfarim, there are Musar Sfarim like that they, the assumption is that you're going to read this, and that's going to somehow trickle down and eventually change your behavior. But yeah.
You're unmuted.
Okay. Yeah.
I was wondering
Yeah.
if Barbanel could have read Machiavelli, and I looked up dates, and I don't know.
Are
Machiavelli
they
died,
around the same time? When did
well, Machiavelli died in 1527, and the Barbanel did in 1508. So,
how old was Machiavelli when he died?
Oh, yeah, that's the thing. When did he write The Prince? I have to. Well, we'll try to collate it.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. And so now we have that he commanded us to listen to the great court and to do everything that they commanded us to forbid, and to permit. So you will assume this is the Sanhedrin, and that the Sanhedrin is not just, in this case, they're not just rendering judgment, but they're deciding a law. They may be legislating the law, but it could also be that they are interpreting the law, or in the case of the calendar, they're actually implementing the law. And so we have to listen to the final result. And there is no difference in this whether the matter is one that they have understood from reason, that they have derived from analogies by which the Torah is expounded, that they agreed that it was prohibited by the Torah, or according to some content that they think is correct and by which the Torah is reinforced. About all of it are we obliged to listen, to do, and to practice according to their words. We're not to diverge from this. And that is, may he be blessed, saying, in accordance with the instructions given to you. And the language of the Sifrei is, and the judgment that they tell you shall you do. That is a positive commandment, and the regulations of this commandment have already been explained at the end of Sanhedrin. So let's just again look at some of these. I want to just look at the way the Hebrew characterizes it. So he says, "Ve'ein havdel bazeh." There's no distinction here with this. Bein hadavar sheyazbaruhu, whether it's something they're explaining, or davar sheyotziuhu manhag keshim she'atorah nidreshes behen, or whether it's something that they drew out of. He mentions hekesh here. Hekesh is one of the methods that you can apply to the Torah and extract law from. She'atorah nidreshes behen, that the Torah is, again here, the word midrash, the verb is nidreshet. This is not midrash in the sense that we regularly use it. When we use it, we're talking about those teachings that tend to be cryptic and oftentimes are about ideas. This is talking about midrash that is about law. And so this is, again, that technique where you can apply certain mechanisms like Gzeira Shava, which is where you have a word in one place, the word is used in another place, and there's a bridge made between those two places, and you learn law from one to another. So the tradition about a Gzeira Shava is that you had to have it as something you received from your teacher. Gzeira Shava is not one that you just apply on your own. You had to have it as a tradition from a teacher. That being said, you see all over the Gemara where they'll say, like, this person had the Gzeira Shava, the other person didn't have the Gzeira Shava, or the other person didn't follow the Gzeira Shava because he thinks these words are not extra, or he has actually some reason why he's not learning the Gzeira Shava. So Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz has some recorded classes about these principles, these mechanisms that you can use to draw out law from the Torah. And he, I think we even looked at it a while back. So and when he was talking about Gzeira Shava in particular, he said that the way many of the commentaries understand it, when it says that you have to have a tradition about it, what it means is that you have a tradition, there's a Gzeira Shava. You don't have all the details. And it could be that it's in the details that there's arguments, about it. But anyways, that's an example of a mechanism that you can use to apply to the Torah, and law can be the result. So if they use those and they came to some conclusion, you have to listen to that conclusion. Or there's, for instance, let's say, agreement amongst the people in the Sanhedrin that something is biblically forbidden. I wonder what that word is. Or if it's a matter, in other words, they said something is straight, Vishabo Chizuk Torah. It must be Chizuk, not Chizuk. There's some kind of strengthening of the Torah. So this is more like what we would call fences.
Now it's not symmetric because you can't go the other way. They can make something that's forbidden by the Torah and decide that it's lenient.
Right. Although sometimes when they're making, when you interfere, you can interfere in a way that there is what would look like a leniency, or like, so for instance, they could decide not that we're not going to blow the shofar on Shabbos.
That's a positive commitment.
Right. So they learned that they made a rabbinic decree. They made a rabbinic decree because they were concerned that somebody might carry their shofar in a public domain. That's what they explained is their rabbinic decree. And therefore, because of their rabbinic decree, again, they're making some kind of offense so that people won't come to carry the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, but it ends up that you're not blowing shofar on Rosh Hashanah.
But you're still you're not violating a negative mitzvah. You're violating a positive mitzvah. Now
Right,
they tapped onto it. They made it forbidden.
Fine.
They
I'm
didn't
saying
make it
that's an
rishus.
example. You were saying that there's not a leniency. They're not creating a leniency. That was what you were saying. They can't create a leniency. So I'm suggesting that de facto they created a leniency because essentially they caused that you don't have to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. So I mean, it doesn't feel like a, but it's technically a leniency. You don't have to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah.
Leniency is like I don't have to do. There's a bracha that I didn't have to say. Now I don't have to say the. It's not much of a leniency when you take a look at it.
Right. Well, this would be a leniency.
I don't have to.
Because for somebody, it could be a big effort to find a place to blow the shofar. They don't have to find I don't know. All right. Okay. We could end that. So we have to listen to them. We have to do what they tell us to do. Lamod al pihem, and stand on their word. Lo navor mimena, we can't turn away from it or pass over it. V'hu amru yisparach al pia Torah asher yerucha, and this is what God said, may he be blessed. According to the Torah, which they will direct you, they will show you the regulations of the commandment. That here they have that they tell you, shall you do, that is a positive commandment. In accordance with the instructions they give you, is the way he translates it. That word, yorucha, is like the word Torah. It means to guide you. Or Ulashon sifrei kol mitzvah asher yomer lecha tasa zu mitzvah saseh. So any mitzvah which they tell you to do, you must do it. It's a positive commandment. Ukvar hisbaro mishpatei mitzvah zu b'sof Sanhedrin, and the laws of this mitzvah are explained in Sanhedrin. This language that he says in the Hebrew here, he said, "V'lashon sifrei kol ha-mitzvah asher yomer lecha tasa zu mitzvah saseh." So it is a positive commandment to follow through and listen to what they have to say, and that's how he knows to place this as mitzvah 174. This is the Rambam's consistent opinion. The Rambam holds that whenever you fulfill a rabbinic commandment, you are also fulfilling a biblical commandment. So for instance, Hanukkah candles. Hanukkah candles are a rabbinic commandment. They're the ones who instituted it. But if you light Hanukkah candles and you're lighting them because the rabbis told you, that's a fulfillment of the mitzvah of listening to the rabbis. So it ends up, according to the Rambam, that every rabbinic commandment also has a biblical commandment. This point is something that other contemporaries of his and people who came a little bit after him, other Rishonim, early scholars take issue with, because there's all sorts of time. There's so many times where we distinguish between a rabbinic and a biblical commandment. For instance, that topic that that David just brought up, where typically when it comes to biblical commandments, if we move to the more severe side, like, so if we have some doubt about a biblical commandment, we tend to be stringent, not lenient. When something's considered biblical, it's taken with a lot more, there's a lot more gravitas. Again, rabbinic commandments are very important and very serious themselves, but the biblical ones, when they compare to biblical ones, the biblical ones are treated with more gravitas. So for instance, if you have a commandment to say Birkat Hamazon, and there's some question about when you said it, if you said it, or you have some doubt, you have to be stringent. So if you're not sure if you said it, you might have to say it again. Or if you're not sure if you did it right, you might have to do it again. Because it's biblical, we take extra care with it. Whereas with a rabbinic one, let's say the blessings beforehand. So again, let's assume the blessings beforehand are rabbinic. So if you weren't sure, you wouldn't say it again. Or if there was some question about the blessing, you would be lenient. So the question that others ask on the Rambam, I think even the Ramban, Nachmanides asked this on him, if every rabbinic mitzvah comes with a biblical one, then why are we ever making a distinction? In the end, there's a biblical commandment here. Because as the Rambam is saying here, every time I follow through on something they told me to do, I'm fulfilling a positive commandment. Okay. Mitzvah number 175. That is, that he commanded us to follow the majority when there is a disagreement among the sages and about any of the laws of the Torah. And likewise, should we be drawn and directed in a private decision by way of illustration between Reuven and Shimon. If there's a disagreement between the judges of their city, whether Shimon or Reuven is liable, we are drawn after the majority. All right, so this law doesn't just apply to the Sanhedrin, it applies to local Beit Dins as well, that the law is decided based on the majority. And that is, may he be exalted, saying, after the majority to incline, or what we in Hebrew, Achrei Rabim Lahatos. And in the explanation, they say, judgment according to the majority is from the Torah. The regulations of this commandment, its analysis and its clarification have already been explained in various places in Sanhedrin. So when you are within the Sanhedrin, you go after the majority. When you're in smaller courts, you go after the majority. It's called rove. Now, there's another type of rove where they typically reference these verses, which is that if, for instance, if you have a mixture of two foods, one of them is kosher and one of them is not, if a majority is kosher, you would say it is kosher on a biblical level because you go by the majority. Or that famous case of you found a piece of meat and in the same area where that meat, where you found the piece of meat, you found it wrapped in like butcher paper on a bench. So in the same area where you found that meat, there are 10 stores that sell meat. 9 of them are kosher, 1 of them is not kosher. So again, it's always, whenever you start these discussions, there's a basic principle which is simple, and then there's all sorts of questions that follow up, and then you find out that it's not so simple. But in that scenario, if 9 were kosher and 1 of them wasn't, since you have a majority that are kosher, you could treat that meat as kosher. That's another. So those are called rove, and as well. But it's a different application of rove. It's not a bunch of people voting. It's the majority of something or some things, like the set of, you have a set of something and a majority of the elements are one way. So you would go after the majority. He does not mention that type of rove. David and Lois and I once spent some time looking into that subject of rove and the exceptions to rove. And often they would make reference to these same verses that he's referring to here. But here he is only mentioning that the law is decided by the majority. Even on this issue, like there were people, even modern day poskim, who, when it came to determining the law, when there's disagreement, there are many people who assume that if something's in the Shulchan Aruch, that's the last word on the law, and that we just follow whatever's in the Shulchan Aruch. This is not the case. Even when something is mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch, it's not necessarily the final word, because he was a great man, and many considered him the greatest legal mind of the generation. But he still was one man, and there were other people that disagreed with him. So I'm talking about Rabbi Yosef Karo, including Rav Moshe Isserlich, who often was representing the Ashkenazi position. But there were even lots who disagreed with Rav Moshe Isserlich. So you have, I mean, you don't. It's not a bad thing if somebody decided he's going to go with the legal opinions that are in the Shulchan Aruch, but you're going to miss out on nuance and nuanced practice, because not all the poskim of today do that. In fact, hardly any of them just follow whatever it says in the Shulchan Aruch. There are different methodologies that these modern day poskim have. Amongst them, there are those who will catalog all the different opinions, and they'll go by the majority opinion. They'll still go by the majority opinion. I remember with regard to the question of what constitutes a public domain with regard to Shabbos. So the question is, does it have to have all the elements that were present at the time of the Mishkan, which is 600,000 people, gathered there every day, and also a space, an area that has that is 32 feet wide, 16 amot wide. So if you have these conditions, so that would be a public domain, according to everybody. The question is it possible it's a public domain even smaller than that? There are, and with less people going through it than that. So the Mishnah Brura, the Chavetz Chaim, in his halachic work. He says there are 16 on each side. It's sort of even. The very fact that he points that out indicates that if there were a lot on one side and a few on another side, it seems like he would feel compelled to go with the majority. So even though we don't have a Sanhedrin, and even though you might be acting outside of a court, you're just making, you're a posek, you're a halachic decision maker, and you're coming up with a law. There is some question as to whether this rule, this law over here, has standing. Does it, in other words, do you have to consider the majority opinions? There are all sorts of things like that today, especially new kinds of questions that come up because of technology or because of new circumstances of the society. So you have these questions and you end up having different people making decisions about them. And so the question is, do you have to go by the majority opinion? It's not something that was brought up in court. You're not a judge, you're a posek. You're deciding the law. Are you allowed to have a lone opinion on something like that? Or do people, and can people follow you as a lone opinion, even if there's a lot of other people who disagree? All righty.
Rabbi, in
Yeah,
the
go ahead.
Torah itself, that phrase,
Yeah,
Achri Rabim Hachotas, that is specifically referring to the judges.
correct.
Not so when it comes to the kosher mina, they're just using that statement and
Well,
applying
they hold that it's also implied there that it wasn't only meant about that, but it's a notion that has much
Okay.
broader meaning.
Right. But
Yeah.
there seems to be such a difference to me to whether
I agree.
that this is done by chachma in the courts, and now you're
Yeah.
talking about a piece of meat, some, I don't know, it just,
Yeah.
to roll it over like that, it seems a little,
I agree.
don't know.
I agree.
I
And
I vehemently disagree.
Okay, good, we'll
It's,
talk.
Okay.
it's all one principle of logic.
all right.
All right.
But
All right.
you do agree that he doesn't go there on this one. He just sticks with the thing of, how many people are voting.
Right.
He's not talking about that for some reason. Okay, cool. I look forward to learning with you guys. I say we do it again. I say we
Next
do
week.
it next week. Nice.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good idea.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Be well,
Bye-bye.
Estelle.
Oh,
You
Thank
too.
yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Good.